Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Erin O'Riordan. Welcome to Episode 9 of Cut by me and Ted Ellington. If you haven't already seen Episode 8, you can find it by clicking the link right up here. Please remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Chapter 14, October 1999, Halloween. Diana had pieced the story together from conversations she wasn't supposed to have heard as a child. She also knew that she'd probably imagined half of it over the years. The version that she told to Tim came out like this. An was born sometime around the year 1880 in a small village in China. Her parents were farmers. The rice and vegetables they grew on their farm was just enough food to sustain them, but they were happy. They had 2 sons, Chen and Lian. Chen and Lian were big, strong boys, and from a very young age they helped out with the farming. When the younger boy, Lian, was 6 years old, his parents discovered that they were going to have another child. They were very excited, for a third son would have been a tremendous help with the farming and would have taken care of them in their old age. But when the third child was born, she was a girl. Her parents loved An, but she was not the strong farm worker that her brothers were. So her mother and father became very excited when a stranger from the port city of Shanghai passed through their village. The man offered them some money for An, who was 14 years old at the time. The stranger said that he would take An to Shanghai with him, where she would be a serving girl to his sister. He said that he and his sister were wealthy and lived in enormous households full of servants. He showed An's parents a bag of gold coins to prove it. But what will happen to her? An's father asked the stranger. She will learn to cook, clean, and sew, the man said. She does those things now, An's mother replied. Ah, but in the city she will do them in luxury, the stranger told them. My sister is a fine lady and can teach her daughter many things about sophisticated culture. If An does well, she will be rewarded with coins to send home from time to time. And if she does a very good job of absorbing what she sees around her in my sister's household, then surely she will have the chance to marry a wealthy man. Think of how your circumstances would improve then. An's mother and father thought about the stranger's proposal and in the end decided it would be best for An if she went with the man. An's parents may not have realized it, but Shanghai at the turn of the 20th century was widely known throughout Eastern Asia for its hedonism. The bustling port city was filled with opium dens and brothels. 14-year-old An found this out very quickly. For shortly after they arrived at the city, the man who was supposed to be her savior instead sold her into prostitution. An hated the disgusting things she was forced to do in the brothel, yet she saw no way of escaping. That is, until one day, 2 years later, when some young sailors came into the brothel. The madam was a white-haired, stooped old lady who carried a fly swatter and would often swat An on the buttocks with it for no reason at all. She opened the door to the closet-sized room where An and 2 other prostitutes slept on soiled cushions and told all 3 to come and line up. There was a parlor where the women would customarily line up to be chosen by their customers. When An saw the face of one of the sailors in her parlor, her heart leapt with joy. She tried not to alter the expression on her face, but a slight flicker in the eyes of the young sailor told her that he recognized her too. The sailor chose An and took her to a private room. The rooms used by the customers were much nicer than the rooms where An slept. This one had a large window covered with red drapes and a matching, though battered, Persian rug on the floor. The bed was big and soft, with a headboard carved to look like 2 dragons mating. Above it hung 2 decorative swords with colorful, lacquered scabbards. An hated this room. She was always afraid the swords were going to fall on her. She was happy that she wouldn't be getting near the bed today. The sailor closed the door. It didn't lock, but he pressed his body against it to keep it closed. An, my sister, the sailor exclaimed. Mom and Dad told me that you went away to the city to become the serving girl of some rich old bitch. How did you end up in a place like this? That son of a bitch our parents sold me to was a liar, and he tricked us, she told him. Lian, what are you doing away from the farm? What are you doing in Shanghai? Lian shook his head sadly. Ever since you went away, dear sister, it's been as if there is a curse on our farm. There was a drought, and the crops didn't grow. Dad had to sell some of his land just to feed us. I couldn't stand to see the family living in such desperately poor circumstances, so I ran away. I came to Shanghai hoping to find a good job and make enough money to send home to Mom and Dad. But there isn't much honest work around here that pays well. One night, while I was in a tavern trying to drink away my troubles, I heard a man bragging that he was a pirate, and that he had all the gold he ever wanted from raiding Japanese merchant vessels. I followed him down to the docks and met his crew. He was exaggerating about the riches, but as a pirate, I have what I need to live and enough to send a little money home. He held his head in his hands as he said this. Put her hand on her brother's shoulder gently. Don't be ashamed, she told him. After the things I've seen and done in this place, nothing you could ever do would shock or shame me. Leon took a deep breath. He wiped the look of shame from his face and looked at with determination. I'm going to get you out of here, he said. The madam began pounding on the door. Are you finished yet? She yelled through it. 5 more minutes, Leon yelled back. Then he said to I have plenty of money in my pocket. I'll buy you from that horrible creature. Show me, said Leon reached into his pocket and pulled out his money, holding it up for to see. She wrinkled her nose. I make more than that for the madam in a week, said. She'll never agree to it. Leon drew his short sword from his belt. We're getting out of here together, one way or another, he said. He swung the door open. The madam stood there with her arms crossed. When he saw she said, look at little Miss Princess here. Not a wrinkle on her dress or a hair out of place. How do you expect to keep the customers satisfied like that? Grabbing An's arm and pulling her roughly, she turned to Leon. Or was it just that you couldn't get it up? She never saw the sword in Leon's hand. All that An saw was the look of absolute rage on Leon's face. An had seen angry men many times since leaving her parents' home. She had the cuts and scars on her body to prove it. But she always thought of Leon as the strong but gentle farm boy she knew from her childhood. She never imagined him capable of such violence. Yet there he was, striking the madam with his short sword. The blade hacked into the side of her body, spraying the wall with blood. Bitch! The madam screamed, pushing An away from her with all her strength. She wasn't very strong, but the shove made An lose her balance, and she fell face first into the worn Persian rug. Get back to work! An heard the madam shriek. When An righted herself, she knew from the flow of blood that she would never have to obey the woman's orders again. By now, the 2 enormous men who served as bodyguards for the old madam had heard her screams. As they rushed toward Leon, he ran over to the bed and pulled one of the decorative swords from the wall. An scrambled to her feet, and Leon thrust the sword into her hands. Fight! He shouted. An was more frightened than she had ever been. She was even more frightened now than on her first night in the brothel when these same 2 bodyguards broke her in for the madam. She thought about that night as she slashed blindly at one of him. He laughed as she made shallow cuts on his arm. He tried to take the sword from her. Summoning a strength hidden deep within her, An leapt back. She swung the sword around her head and struck the bodyguard's neck. The wound was not a deep one, but it stopped his laughter. Smiling, An reared back and drove the sword into his overfed gut. She imagined it would go in easily, but this was far from the case. It struck a bone. She tried to pull it as the man slumped to the ground. Leave it, Leon ordered. An looked over. The second bodyguard lay dead at his feet. Some of the other prostitutes and their Johns had come to watch the fight. The women clapped and cheered. The older men took it in stoically, while some of the younger men looked as though they were about to vomit. A few called for someone to stop Leon, but none dared. Leon hooked his arm around An's and pulled her through the crowd and out the back door. They ran until they came to the sea. Still holding on to his sister, Leon jumped feet first into the water. An could barely swim, and the cold chilled her. Are you crazy? She shouted as she swam for the sand under the nearby dock. When they were safely on dry land, Leon answered. We have to get the blood off, he said. We can't go around in public looking like we've just murdered 3 people. Murdered. The word echoed in An's head. She was happy to be out of the brothel, to be looking at the night sky again instead of staring into a stranger's dead eyes. But now she had nowhere to go. She rested her head on her knees and began to cry. Leon stood and shook his head. Don't let this upset you. We did what we had to do, that's all. Come on, stand up and shake some of the water off yourself. She did as she was told. But the question was still unanswered. Where are we going to go? I'm going to take you home, then I'm going back to my ship. I'll send home extra money to help our parents take care of you. Maybe you'll be lucky and you'll find someone to marry you. He was hopeful, but she looked out over the dark sea, pondering. What's wrong? She placed a hand on the soft curve of her belly. I'm going to have a baby, she said. Are you sure? Yes. This isn't the first time. Only the other time the madam gave me some terrible-tasting bitter tea that made me bleed heavily. She smiled, then frowned in rapid succession. She's not here to take the life of my child any more. But I don't know what I'll do about Mom and Dad. They'll never understand. It wasn't your fault, Leon said. You didn't want to do those things. I know you. You're not like that. It doesn't matter, Anne said. You know our parents. They're old country people, and they couldn't be more old-fashioned. They won't let me come home now. Come on. Never one for standing around thinking, Leon led his sister to the nearest tavern. He got a few suspicious looks, but that was probably because he was with a strange new girl. The regulars at the tavern clearly knew Leon by name. He ordered 2 beers and 2 shots of whiskey. Anne sniffed at the drinks contemptuously. Drink, Leon said. It'll do you a world of good. I've never tasted beer and whiskey, Anne said, except on the breath of the old drunks who came into the brothel to fuck me. Believe me when I say they don't exactly conjure up a lot of pleasant memories. But she did drink the whiskey and then the beer, and she did begin to feel better. Leon came up with a plan. He would simply cut off Anne's long hair and dress her up in some old clothes. He would pass her off as his cousin from the country, and she would accompany him on his next pirating expedition. It was a fine plan, except that when the men of the crew saw Anne, they immediately knew that she was a woman. They made some crude remarks, but Leon drew his sword, and everyone agreed that Leon could come along on this one voyage only. Leon's pirate ship was hardly worthy of being called a ship at all. It was more of a large fishing boat, although it did have a cannon. The rusted cannon had been salvaged from the wreck of a British trader. The ship's crew consisted of 6 men other than Leon. They didn't give Anne their names, and she didn't ask. They looked as if they all had something to hide. She wouldn't have been surprised if they were all murderers. Still, sensing that this was her only chance, Anne clung to Leon and sailed with them. 3 days out to sea, the would-be pirates had encountered nothing but fishing vessels. They would sometimes rob the unfortunate fishermen of their catch, their water, or their liquor if there was any, but it was hardly worth the trouble. Then, as the sun was beginning to set on the 3rd evening, Anne spotted a ship's billowing white sails in the distance. She took the news straight to Leon. Leon took a look at the vessel and shook his head. Japanese Navy, he said. We wouldn't dare. What do you mean you wouldn't dare? Anne questioned. You're a pirate. The penalty for piracy is death, one of the crew replied, and the Japanese are even more relentless about tracking down violators than the Chinese, especially if the victim ship happens to be in the Navy, Leon added. Attack the Japanese military and they'll consider it an attack against the Emperor himself. And you know how funny they are about their royal family. The entire crew laughed except Anne. She'd met a few Japanese men in her line of work, but she'd had little opportunity to converse with them about politics. The ship's crew went back to what they were doing, drinking and playing cards mostly. Anne watched the single-masted vessel with the white sails as it drew closer. She soon realized it was not alone. There were 3 naval vessels in a V formation, escorting the largest ship Anne had ever seen. She ran and reported this finding to Leon. He looked at the ships again. He smiled and shook his head. Someone really important, he told his sister. Maybe the Emperor himself. Let's take it, Anne said. You're talking crazy. There are 3 heavily armed vessels guarding that ship. They'd shred us to twigs. Not if they didn't see us. In the dark, they probably haven't spotted us yet. The rear of that Imperial vessel is totally unguarded, as far as we know. Well, would it hurt to sneak around back and look? Anne turned her head. She noticed one of the crew standing off in the distance, waiting to speak to Leon. Well, Leon said impatiently. She's right, the man said. I'd be willing to take my chances that the Navy vessels haven't spotted us yet. The royal vessel itself isn't heavily armed, and there are only 8 of us. We don't make much noise. I think we could get aboard and do our damage before most of the crew knows what's happening. Just do a little stealing and be on our way. He smiled broadly. You're both fucking crazy, Leon exclaimed. Let them catch us, Anne said. Let them hang us from the highest cherry blossom trees in Japan. What do we have to live for? I'll tell the others, said the crewman. We'll put it to a vote. I'll tell them if we get caught, it's the noose. But if we don't, it's riches we never dreamed of. Be practical, said Leon. They're probably on a diplomatic mission. I doubt they brought many treasures with them. Won't know till we get there, Anne said. She wore the stubborn look on her face that Leon remembered from when he'd last seen her 2 years ago when she was still a child. The men in An voted on the matter. Leon's was the only dissenting opinion. They swiftly changed course, trailing the large Japanese vessel just as clouds crossed the moon and sent the night into jet blackness. As the crew suspected, it was guarded only from the front. The pirates saw little human activity. There were 2 sailors on night watch, but they seemed to have fallen asleep at their posts. 4 crewmen stayed behind. Leon volunteered to go aboard, and to his chagrin, An insisted on coming with him. She said she didn't want to be left alone with the others, and Leon had to admit she had a point there. The pirates boarded the vessel easily, making little noise. They made their way down to the cabins. Working as one, they pushed their way through one of the cabin doors. 2 women slept in one bed. One of them was clearly a servant. She was middle-aged, with gray-streaked black hair, a worn white gown, and dirty bare feet. The other wore slippers so finely jeweled that they shimmered even in the near blackness of the starlight. She wore a silk gown that An guessed was pale green. Her face was young and unlined. She looked as if she had never wanted for anything. An saw that there were no scars on her long, slender arms. Even in her sleep she wore a haughty expression and a bracelet of carved red jade beads. An reached for the bracelet, intending to slip it off the sleeping lady's hand. Leon stopped her. Silently he gestured toward a long wooden box at the side of the bed. Sitting on it, swaying slightly with the motion of the ship, was a necklace. Like the bracelet, it was made of carved red jade beads. These beads were larger, and the lotus blossoms carved from them were more finely detailed. They alternated with beads of shimmering gold. In its center, resting upright on the box, was a golden pendant. An gasped when she saw that the pendant represented Kuan Yin. All of her life, An had been praying for the goddess of mercy to take pity on her and protect her. She had called on Kuan Yin that first night in the brothel and went to sleep with the goddess's name on her lips each night since. An snatched the necklace from the wooden box. Just then the servant woman stirred. She began to scream, saying something in Japanese that An couldn't understand. "Wait a minute," Tim said, setting down his fork. "You're telling me that the necklace you're wearing now was stolen from a Japanese princess by your grandmother's grandmother in, 1900? 1896 or thereabouts, Diana answered, looking up from her steak. "I told you I take this particular family legend with a grain of salt." Speaking of salt, she reached for her second margarita and took a long sip. "And they got away with it?" "No, of course not. They were captured and eventually hanged from a willow tree, like all captured pirates were in those days." Tim shook his head. "If your grandmother's grandmother was hanged from a willow tree before her baby was born, then how are you sitting here today?" "I didn't say she was hanged before the baby was born. The naval commander took pity on An because she was pregnant and delayed the execution until after the child was born. She had a boy, my great-grandfather, who was also named Leon. An was allowed to give the boy to her older brother Chen, who raised him a decent, respectable farmer." "What about the necklace?" Tim asked. "Didn't the princess just take it back when An and the pirates were caught?" "Supposedly, when she was caught and brought on deck, An pretended to hurl the necklace into the sea. But through the sleight of hand tricks she learned in the brothel for pocketing the customers' extra cash, she managed to keep the pendant. Then, when nobody was looking, she swallowed it." "Ew," said Tim. "Somehow she managed to keep it hidden until little Leon was born. When the baby was passed to Chen, the pendant was hidden inside his garments. Leon passed it to Mei Li, his oldest child. It was all that she ever had of her grandmother. I can see why Leon gave up his devotion to Kuan Yin," Tim said. "The goddess failed to protect his mother. She didn't save An from being forced into prostitution or from being executed as a pirate." Diana picked at her salad. "I suppose that's why the family converted to Catholicism," she said, spearing a mushroom with her fork. "But not you. You're a Wiccan." "That's right," she said. She glanced at her watch. "Do you think we have time for dessert and coffee before we head to the bonfire?" Tim didn't drink coffee and had already told Diana so. He didn't care much for dessert either, preferring to keep his meals as simple as possible. However, with Diana sitting across from him, looking so appealing, Tim thought he might break his own rules once. "Plenty of time," he said. "The bands don't even start until 11. You've been listening to Episode 9 of Cut by Erin O'Riordan and Ted Ellington. Thanks for listening. If you like the story, please remember to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. When episode 10 is ready, you'll be able to click the link right here. Thanks, and have a great day.